Welcome to my review of Castlevania 3 Dracula's Curse for the NES. And this one took me around 8 hours and 38 minutes to beat. And I definitely found this to be the most difficult of all the linear Castlevania games, in the 2D style. So not including games that have backtracking like Vampire Killer for MSX, the games that are in the Symphony of the Night style, but just the linear games like Dracula X, Super Castlevania, the original Castlevania games like that, which I've beaten most of those. I found this to be the most difficult one. Definitely a challenging game. And, on the NES, it's higher up on the list as far as, like, the action games on the NES. It's definitely one of the better action games on the NES. Though I do have some issues with the game that takes it down for me, and I don't hold the game in as high regard as I've heard some people, but I'll get into that a little bit more. I'll also drop a link to my tutorial in this review, in the description. So check that out. That I have, I explain all my strats with commentary and go into detail with that. So in this game, once you beat certain stages, you can choose your path at a few different points. So for me, I went with the Sypha path, which gets me the character Sypha that I can switch between, and I found that to be the best. From some of the research I did before playing the game, it seems to be the best way to go for a first-time playthrough. But you'll see that in a little bit. Here I'm just showing some of the boss fights. One thing about the game, because it has multiple paths, it doesn't always have original bosses. And even on the main path I took to get Sypha, I did come across some of the same bosses repeated several times. Like you see this hammer guy. Even on the Sypha path, he probably repeats like 2 or 3 times as one of the bosses. But what they do is they throw in some of the other bosses you face, so you'll have to fight like 3 bosses in a row or something like that. But some of them will be repeat bosses that you already dealt with, which I think is a little shitty. You know what I mean? But I mean it's not a game killer or anything like that. But it does take away from some of the variety that the game appears to have with all the different paths. But on the positive side, with all the different paths, you do have a lot of stages in this game. So there is replay there. And you can try playing it with the different characters, which play quite a bit different. Like Grant will climb on walls. Or not Grant. It's one of the other guys, but he'll climb on walls and shit like that. There's another guy, I think Alucard can fly. You can turn into a bat and fly. And then Sypha, the main thing with her is that she has some really good specials like that have homing capability and they can freeze. And that's her. I just got her right there. But She has some special moves. Her sub-weapons are pretty good for bosses and even regular enemies. Very, very useful character. So, each one of the characters that you can kind of recruit is different. They play quite different, and they go through different stages on their paths. So you got a few, it diverts at a few points where you can make a few selections on what path you want to take. You see, we're fighting the Mummy now, which this is a boss that repeats along with the hammer guy that we saw earlier. So I'm just showing that some of the bosses do repeat. And it gives you an idea of the kind of boss fights. I tried to edit in some of the better, boss fights or the ones that showed something like this shows that they do repeat the bosses, which is kind of a little cheap. But it's not a huge deal. A lot of old games did it. So now we're going to see one of the problems that I have with the game, and I'm going to show it a little bit more later in the video, but the game really, really likes to lean heavily on, combat on the stairways, which is where the control is the worst in the game. So, anytime you have to fight things on the stairs, it's really bad because if you do press up to use a sub-weapon, you're going to get magnetized into the stairway, and then you can't jump and you get locked into place. And it can just be really irritating to have shit coming at you on the stairs. And it does feel very cheap because it kind of capitalizes on one of the worst aspects of the game. It's like they doubled down on one of the worst aspects of the game, which is the stairway control. That's pretty much the weakest aspect of the game. And I know it's been like that since, the first game. But in this, they wanted to double down on those fucking stairs. They said, the stairs, it's a great fucking feature of the original game. So, let's really dig into that concept here and, give you a lot of combat and maneuvering that you have to do on the stairs while shit is flying around. And it's challenging, it's definitely challenging, but not in a way that I would really appreciate. I don't feel like it's taking advantage of some of the better mechanics of the game. I feel like it's kind of a weak thing to focus on. But, it will definitely provide some trial and error type of gameplay as you figure it out. And, obviously I beat the game and figured it out, but it's just, for me, a weak aspect. Another thing I don't like about the game, but this does happen on a lot of NES games, is that it does tend to eat your inputs a lot. Because there's a lot of slowdown that happens, especially around the stairs in some of the areas where there's a lot of shit on screen. And, some of your inputs will get eaten, so your moves don't come out. And then on top of that, of course, you're getting sucked into the stairs. If you have a staircase above or below you, if you hit up or down, you're going to get sucked into either the one that's below you or above you. So you got to be very careful what you press, in those instances. And I'm trying to use a sub-weapon while on the stairs. It only works for me sometimes. It's really kind of weird control that only works sometimes for me, and I'm not sure why. But I did have some issues with that. Not something I was a fan of. So for me, that does, the game really doubles down on that in quite a few parts. So for me, that's definitely a big flaw of the game. And it does take my score down a little bit. But I did say a lot of positive things about the game earlier on, beginning of the review. And, I still hold to that. I think that the core gameplay here, it's Castlevania, it's like the first game. And it does, in some ways, you could say, it improves it in some ways. I mean, it adds more complexity to it. I'll say that much. It doesn't necessarily improve the gameplay, but it makes it more challenging, and it adds more. There's more going on that you have to manage. So that's part of why the game's a lot more difficult. Stages are a lot longer than they were in the first game. And, you do have unlimited continues and passwords, but you have to start at the beginning of a stage when you lose your lives. And there's not a hell of a lot of wall meat. Though there really wasn't maybe a lot in the original either. But the game definitely seems like it was, intentionally made to be more difficult. But some of that I really like because they made the game, more complex. It's just that the NES, is not the best system to handle a lot of chaos on screen like, arcade machines were back in the day that could handle tons of shit on screen. The NES wasn't really a powerhouse. So some of the stuff they try to throw at it does cause a lot of chugging, technical issues. So it's just one of those things that kind of brings it down for me, but it is to be expected on a lot of these games. But I think Castlevania 3 was one of the games, later NES games, that really pushed the hardware a little bit more. So that might be why. Which is cool to see. But it does come with a price. So here you see me switching characters, and you're going to see how useful Sypha can be. You already saw me freeze the lake and freeze some of the enemies in some of the areas, which is fucking awesome with Sypha. Of course, you have to know where the weapons are, the sub-weapons, to get them, to use them in specific areas. And that's all part of the strats. But you'll see how good she is on the Grim Reaper boss, which, if you remember in the first game, the Grim Reaper was a single form boss, and it was way fucking harder than this boss, which is 2 forms, but way easier. So, you'll see that fight here, but it's a cool fight. But if you have Sypha, it's a joke, because you just get this little homing magic she has right before the boss. And you can just melt this boss pretty easily. And she pulls bullshit like this on a lot of bosses. I'm also going to show the full final stage. I had a no-death run of the final stage. It was just because I had practiced the stage well enough. I wasn't going for a no-death run, but, of course, I'm not trying to die either. But it turned out to be pretty clean, so I left that in for the review. I thought that would be cool to show as a little final, but keep in mind there's probably about 3 different endings and maybe 3 different paths if I'm right about that. I think because there's 2 other characters, and this was one of the paths, and I believe each character has their own ending path as well. At least I assume they do. I know there's a few endings, but yeah. So you're seeing the Sypha path, obviously. So. The last boss may actually even be different I'm not even sure. I should have looked it up for the sake of the review, but I'm not sure if the actual last boss changes, but a lot of different things do change. And you're going to get a different ending, too, if you have a different companion with you. So, though the endings are very negligible in these NES games, obviously. You see the stairs there. That was another example of stairs bullshit. That was one of the most egregious examples of the stairs. These Medusa heads can be annoying in this area, but if you just walk... it makes it a lot easier. If you jump, it really fucks you up because the platforms start flipping over. Not a complaint or anything there. The stairs are my complaint. All these other aspects, a lot of this other stuff I think is really cool and well designed, and I like it. It would just be nicer if the NES ran it a little bit better. It is a little bit much for the system to handle at times, and it can be irritating. But you can see she pulls a lot of bullshit. I got here with no health this section, and you get up there and just use your homing, and it destroys the boss. So now we have the final stage, which I thought, like I said, would be cool to show for the review, since it was a clean run. I had a few stages where I had no death runs of in my legit playthrough of the game, which is up on the channel, and I also have the tutorial, which I'll link. The tutorial adds my commentary, and I'm just going over the strats that I use. Basically, it's pretty much the same as the playthrough I posted up. It's just I added feedback on it and what I was trying to do. But yeah, the game can be very challenging, as you can probably tell by watching the footage. It can definitely be challenging. It's much harder than the first game. The first game, had a roadblock for me with the Grim Reaper for a while, but once I got past that, there wasn't much in the game that held me back for too long. I would get through the game, fairly quickly, most of it anyway. I think the Frankenstein stage gave me a little trouble, but, nothing crazy. But now you got to do some very specific maneuvering, as you can see, getting on the right blocks so you don't fall. And this section's pretty tricky too. But if you get the stopwatch, you at least can get things to work in your favor a little bit more. Sypha, she has such a short range attack, but her specials are so fucking good, so it kind of balances out. She also takes a little bit more damage than your main character does, the guy with the whip. I guess maybe it's Grant. You can tell I don't pay attention to storyline and shit. I really don't give a fuck. My main thing is gameplay. I mean, I enjoy the atmosphere a lot in modern games, but I don't even really give that much of a shit about story, even in RPGs and games where people usually do give a shit about that. But I do enjoy the atmosphere of modern visuals and sound, and all that shit is very cool. But gameplay is king for me, so my reviews, will focus mainly on that. Of course, this game has a great soundtrack. That doesn't really even need to be said. I mean, it's in line with the first game. No, for me, the first game is more memorable, and it's the game that I would rather replay, even though this game does technically have more replay value with the different paths. Of course, I like the music better in the first game, and I like the first game better. It's just a better flow to me. But that's only because I'm more familiar with the game. It's not because this game has a worse flow. It's just a matter of learning the patterns to get good at the game. But, like I said, I mean, this game, it pretty much delivers, in most aspects, on being like a big upgrade and a big sequel from the first game. The second game, of course, on the NES was Simon's Quest. That wasn't really a real sequel. That was like a different type of game. And it's actually super easy if you know exactly where to go, if you go step by step with a guide, which is what I did. But this is the next real Castlevania game to me, in the style of that first game. And it doesn't disappoint in that sense. I mean, it definitely ups the ante in all the key areas, I would say. So you can pull some bullshit with positioning here you saw in the first form of Dracula by getting on the 6th block and spamming your fire. This guy's also very easy with Sypha using the flame, which is all shit that I'm going to go over in the tutorial. But this is a cool boss fight with 3 different forms, so it's pretty cool. I mean, the first Castlevania game, pretty much only had single form bosses. So, you get a little bit of an upgrade with the boss fights. They're a little bit more, there's a few boss fights that are like multiple forms. The Grim Reaper, the final boss, and it's kind of cheap, but sometimes they stack bosses, like ones you've already beaten, you have to fight 3 of them in a row, which to me is not a great design, but you can see they were trying to amp everything up a little bit with this game. But like I said, some of the slowdown and shit, it does kind of gimp the controls and kind of throw me off sometimes. So some of those aspects and the overemphasis on all the stairs combat for me were kind of shitty aspects of the game. But I would still regard this game very highly as one of the better action games on the NES, and definitely one to experience. I'd give it a 7.5 out of 10. Quite a good game to me. Not quite on the level of something I'd give over an 8. Like an 8 is great to me. I would rate the games like in the Ninja Gaiden series on NES would be more along that, those lines. This is not quite that for me, but I could see a lot of players feeling that way about the game. If you have any questions, let me know, and thanks for watching.